Good afternoon everybody, hope you're having a lovely day. So this is upper intermediate lesson number 3. We were looking last week at indirect questions, and I didn't record a video at the end of the last lesson because I wanted to check a few things. I've checked them, they were all good, the lesson was incredibly fantastic, and I'm now ready just to go over what we did last week. Basically what we did, we looked at the rules for turning a direct question into an indirect question. And we came up with 4 very good rules that are very hard to break, and I like those sort of rules. So let's start with rule number 1. Let's start with rule number 1. The introductory phrase. So things like, could you tell me? Something with a modal verb normally works very well. So let's give it a quick example. And remember, the reason why we turn direct questions into indirect questions is purely because of politeness. There are other reasons, of course, uncertainty, checking, but politeness, I think, is the key. So let's use this as the example introductory phrase. You can say, could you tell me? I was wondering if, blah, 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 blah. Lots of different examples. So rule number 1, introductory phrase. Rule number 2, for the auxiliary verb do, remove. So we use the auxiliary verb do in present simple questions, in past simple questions, do and does, did and didn't, does and doesn't, that sort of thing. If it's in there, remove it. An example, when does the bus leave? So there's an example. When does the bus leave? I'll put it on the captions in a minute. When does the bus leave? Can you tell me when the bus leaves? So it's very important that you check the tense, because as soon as you remove do, you then have to check the structure of the sentence without the verb do. So when does the bus leave? We've put the main verb leave into the present simple first person because of the verb, auxiliary verb do. But as soon as you take it out, you then need to think, do I need to change that? And in this case you do. So when, can you tell me when the bus leaves? It leaves. So that's something you need to watch out for. So that's rule number 1, the auxiliary verb do, remove it. Okay, so that's rule number 2 then. So rule number 3, the auxiliary verb be. And the rule for this one, in simple tenses, put it at the end. I hope you can see the end there. So an example, where is the bank? Which is quite a direct question. It's not very polite, but as soon as you add can you tell me, suddenly it's really polite. So can you tell me where the bank is? So as you can see, the auxiliary verb to be just goes at the end of the sentence, and this tends to be in the simple tenses, and I think they're also within the simple active tenses as well. So passive is another story altogether, which we'll come on to in a moment. Let's change the colour, let's go for blue. Rule number 4. On the sheet of paper I did last week, I wrote modal verbs as rule number 4, but this is modal verbs and the auxiliary verb have, and any auxiliary verb in the passive as well. So what we could do here for rule is just write other auxiliary verbs. So other auxiliary verbs, and I'll just write here, including modals, including have, and including all other tenses, really, including all other tenses, including passive tenses, plus passive, because I think passive is very important. So within rule number 4, it's all about changing the position of the subject and the auxiliary verb. So rule number 4, the auxiliary verb and the subject swap places. So, some examples of that. I've got some passive questions on the internet. Let me just read them out. Here's a question in, for example, the present perfect tense. Has the house been built? So here we're using rule number 4 with the auxiliary verb have. Has the house been built? Can you tell me if the house has been built, if it has been built? So we've just taken the auxiliary and the subject and we've changed them around. Everything else remains the same. Here's a future tense. Will the house be built? Can you tell me if the house will be built? Present continuous. Present or future with going to. Is the house going to be built? Can you tell me if the house is going to be built? Hang on, did that work? The house. Can you tell me if the house? Yes, it did work. It did work. Okay. So as you can see, this is quite a big rule because it encompasses everything that isn't here. And here we've just got the verb to do for present simple and past simple, and here the auxiliary verb to be also for present simple and past simple, and then everything else goes here with swapping the auxiliary verb and the subject verb around. So I've got a few passive sentences here to read you as well. Was the book taken to the classroom? Can you tell me if the book was taken to the classroom? So swapping it around. Where is the test written? Can you tell me where the test is written? So, in conclusion, when you are making a direct question indirect, here are the 4 rules you need to follow. Don't forget the introductory phrase for politeness, the auxiliary verb to do, take it away for anything that is present simple or past simple. The auxiliary verb to be, put it at the end of the sentence. And then the final rule, the most important one in a way because it encompasses all other tenses. The auxiliary verb, right, let me correct my spelling, other auxiliary verbs, including all modal verbs, which, as you know from our first lesson, modal verbs are also auxiliary verbs. Modals, the auxiliary verb to have, including all other tenses and passive tenses, swap places. The auxiliary verb and the subject swap places. And that's it. See you in class.